My name is Jaki Shelton Green. I am a documentary poet, professor, and the first African-American poet laureate of North Carolina. Today I am joined by 4 extraordinary people. Their stories are linked by the foremost social, political, and legal campaign of the 20th century, the Civil Rights Movement.
From a nationally prominent civil rights activist leading an organized community, to mom and pop activists facing the violence of white supremacy almost completely alone. My guests and their families played key roles in the battle for equal treatment under United States law. Some challenged segregation in schools. Some challenged it in the polling booth. And one family's efforts spanned generations, institutions, and industries. My guests are the children of civil rights. Joseph Holt Jr. was born in the Oberlin neighborhood in Raleigh, North Carolina. His childhood and adolescence shed light on what his parents and many others fought against.
When the ruling came down in 1954, the Brown versus Board ruling, I was just 11 years old. And as a matter of fact, if someone had asked me at that time what segregation meant, what the word meant, I don't think I would have been able to tell them. Segregation was the norm. So you didn't think about it politically as a teenager so much, but you were very aware of the restrictions and you resented it.
About 200 miles away in Columbia, South Carolina, Cresswell Elmore spent his childhood in a similar situation. But his family's fight was with another racist institution.
The Democratic primary did not allow blacks to vote in the primary system. These all very prominent people said we ought to bring a lawsuit against the Democratic Party. Well, they first had to get somebody's name on the books in order to bring a lawsuit.
Back in Durham, North Carolina, Charmaine was the youngest of 4 siblings in the McKissick family. The McKissicks fought segregation across many industries and institutions. The children were in that fight from the start.
I don't remember starting to picket. That's how young I was. The picture of Floyd and I in front of Royal Ice Cream, I believe I am 5. So we knew better, but we frequently went in the white door and we just played dumb. Well, you know you're supposed to, huh? What? We just get our ice cream. I'm not lying. We did it a lot. Our parents did not know that we were doing this.
Her parents were civil rights leaders Floyd and Evelyn McKissick. Among many accomplishments in education, child care, and civil rights advocacy, Mrs. McKissick was the plaintiff in the lawsuit that led to desegregating the Durham city school system. Floyd McKissick dedicated his life and career to fighting racism. His accomplishments in civil rights span decades and include speaking at the 1963 March on Washington, serving as the national director of the Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, and founding Soul City, a new town designed to provide opportunities for minorities and the poor. All of the McKissick children were on the front lines of the civil rights movement. Each of them played a role in desegregating Durham public schools.
Floyd McKissick, yes, the biography has to be done. Like a huge, massive historical analysis of his time from being raised in North Carolina all the way through to his death and living in Soul City. I mean, that's a biography that has to be 600 pages. It's a life, right? Amazing life that cannot be captured in a few words. So, yeah, it's huge.
Dr. Nishani Frazier's own parents were civil rights activists with unique journeys and contributions to the movement. However, Dr. Frazier's research as a historian and journalist is what brings her here today.
There's never a time that you're not awash in being the child of a civil rights activist. And for some people, it is a struggle, and for some people, it is a crown, and sometimes a bat. So people understood that you don't know who you're dealing with. I've been trained by the best. I fear nothing, I fear no one.
Joseph Holt Jr. was the only child of Joseph Sr. and Alwina Holt. Alwina was a lifelong educator, and Joseph Sr. worked blue-collar jobs across many industries, although his ambition was to work as a medical doctor.
I think anybody who knew Alwina Holt would describe her as a very kind and compassionate woman. You know, she had that quiet determination, and I was kind of like that too, quiet determination. Boys remember their fathers in certain ways. I remember my dad as a very strong man, and he seemed to me to be fearless. The world at that time, for my generation, was that parents went on about doing what they felt they needed to do for their children. And the children found out about it after the fact. But I knew something was going on, and I knew that something had to do with going to a white school.
Like Joseph, Cresswell grew up with a father who projected strength. His mother, like Alwina, was a nurturing presence in their home.
My mother was a wonderful woman. The only thing that Mom she never would chastise us. She would always say, "I'll wait until your dad get home and I'll tell your father." And that was the most fearful thing in the world because he was the ruler of the house. And for a person that came from Holly Hill, South Carolina, only with a 6th or 8th grade education, he was a mastermind at businesses and his entrepreneurship.
George Elmore owned several businesses, including Waverly Five and Dime Store, 2 liquor stores, and a photography service. He also drove a taxi.
It's just amazing for someone that didn't have a formal education like a lot of the gentlemen that he associated with or got involved with during this lawsuit.
In 1944, South Carolina Governor Olin Johnston declared, "White supremacy will be maintained in our primaries. Let the chips fall where they may." The NAACP wanted to challenge the white primary legally, but first they needed someone's name on the books who was rejected on the basis of race.
Well, Mr. Hinton and Dr. Monteith and my father were very fair-complected black men. So my father said, "Well, you've all tried and failed. Let me go to my ward and try and see can I get my name on the book." So he went to the little grocery store not too far from where we lived over Tree Street. And she looked at him and said, "Oh, sure," brought the book out and put the registration book in front of him. And he knew not to put down the address as a result of what the others had done. When they put the address down, they all knew you lived in a black neighborhood. So Dad put down his name and all the pertinent information. And she said, "Oh, you did fine, but you left out one thing." And he said, "What's that?" She says, "Well, you didn't put your address down." He said, "Oh, okay." And he wrote in 907 Tree Street. And she looked at that and said, "Oh." And she used the N-word. And she said, "You're not allowed to vote."
George Elmore received a certified letter informing him that he had been removed from the voter registration. And thus began the lawsuit, Elmore versus Rice, which ultimately ended the white primary in South Carolina.
I remember him saying, he says, "I'm just glad I won." After that, we encountered more of the disastrous portions of it, although it was going on during the trials and the case was proceeding. But then after the case was finally decided, that's when the biggest impact came to the family.
Like the Elmores, the Holt family sought to challenge injustice. In 1956, just 2 years after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, the Holts applied for their son to attend the then all-white Josephus Daniels Junior High School. Their application was denied, but the Holts did not give up. The next year, they applied for their son to attend the all-white Needham Broughton High School. When they were denied again, the Holts took the Raleigh Board of Education to court. Their 3-year legal battle was chronicled by Holt's own daughter Deborah in a documentary called Exhausted Remedies: The Joe Holt Story. The case was ultimately decided against the Holt family. The decision hinged on legal policies crafted by the state to preserve segregation. This is what the governor of North Carolina had to say about integration at that time.
But let no one be misled as to how I personally feel about mixing the races in the schools. I'm unalterably opposed to it, and I intend to continue seeing that our state uses every lawful and proper means to prevent it.
But the school board winning the case to uphold segregation did not stop segregationists from further harassing the Holts.
On my first experience, that there was anger in the white community. It was on a Saturday night, and I picked the phone up, hello, and this guy on the other end of the line was screaming, and he yelled something like, "Are you the black son of a bitch who wants to go to Needham Broughton High School?" We hadn't even applied to Broughton yet, you know, just Daniels. But in this guy's mind, I guess that's what he saw. And what came to my mind as this guy is screaming was, this is the kind of person who you would see in a lynch mob. Screaming, ranting, completely out of control and completely out of his mind. And you had violated everything that made any sense to him. This all ran through my mind all at once. I couldn't speak. I never encountered anything like that before. And this guy was just yelling and screaming, and you know, and I just finally hung up. And it was very frightening to hear somebody like that screaming at you like that and calling your names. That continued for 3.5 years.
I have my students ask me all the time, how could parents ... Like, you know, parents sit around saying, I can't wait to throw my kids into the pit of hell because that's what I live to do. No, it is a total lie to think that because you don't send your child into the civil rights movement that your child is somehow not susceptible to racism. You're already there. So what are you going to do about it?
In 1990, Evelyn and Floyd McKissick sat for one of Floyd's last recorded interviews. Neither Charmaine nor her siblings have watched these interviews until now.
Okay.
And I guess the worst time we had while we were in Durham was when they were trying to integrate all of the eating restaurants and the theaters and all that type of thing. Floyd was on the stage and they sent word that they had bombed our house. And at that time we couldn't get police protection. So friends came over. One friend came over and sat in the middle of that walkway with a rifle all night long. The college kids from the campus came over to give protection, and anybody in Durham that said they were coming to help protect our house, the taxis would give them free rides over to the house. And Floyd and I stayed there, but we sent the children away. After the first night, we sent the children away.
I remember one incident when I was sent out of town. I didn't know that I was sent out of town. I learned that later. But I was down east with relatives. My cousin, who was a little bit older than me, came running through the gate and into the yard, screaming and crying. I saw it on television. Oh, you didn't see anything on television. No, Joe. I saw it on television. Uncle Harmon, Aunt Vannie, they never called her name correctly. They were talking about dynamite in their home. And she was telling the truth. And that's how I learned about that. But they had already known ahead of time that the threats had increased, so they got me out of town because there had been an abduction threat also. That's what we were dealing with, yeah.
The Klan would come and throw these, as we refer to them today as Molotov cocktails, towards the house. Tree Street, where we lived, where all of this occurred, was a dirt street. So they would burn crosses out in the middle of the street. And I remember Dad used to stand by the front door of the home just in case anyone ever broke in. But when he was a cab driver, he somehow or another, he came across an M1 rifle. And I remember him standing at the front door just in the event that anyone ever tried to break in. But no one ever came in the house. The house was never caught fire. So we were blessed in that regard that we didn't get bombed out of the house or the house burned down.
So I don't know, maybe they had planned to do some things. When they found so many people watching the house, they hardly had a chance. Because our neighbors were the type that would watch everything, and they said, look, we're watching out. And one neighbor next door put electrical wires out in case anybody came by. He said, we're here waiting. All we need is excuse. So we had protection, but it wasn't the police.
But really, I can kind of remember like the first time I didn't feel safe, but that was the day that the 4 girls were killed in the Birmingham bombing at a church. And I was always one who loved to go to church and be the first one running up the hill to go to Union Baptist Church. All of us went through each one at different ages. So Jocelyn is high school by the time she integrates. Andre is junior high. And then a few years later, Floyd or I in the 3rd grade and the 6th grade. So, I know some things about Andre and the fact that, the kid, again, junior high, the girls had ganged up on her and put her head in the toilet bowl full of feces. That's just like one day in many. I know with Jocelyn, they knocked her down a flight of steps and just left her, she was unconscious, left her to die. The only black people in the building were, the cafeteria workers and the janitorial workers, and someone found her who happened to be a church member of ours. And and I think they had much tougher times than my brother and I. Don't get me wrong, we had a few things too. And I'll be honest, I do know that the upper echelon crowd in Durham, they kind of thought we were a little crazy at first. Why are you going to go put your children through that? You got it easy, Floyd and Evelyn, why would you go there? And we got these great schools, and we did. We had fabulous schools. Just that combination of Evelyn and Floyd, I think, coming together, and Floyd not having to worry about his income coming from white folk. Neither one of their incomes really were impacted by white people. That makes a difference. You can be more free in what you say and think and what you do when you don't have to worry about, whether you're going to be able to pay your mortgage and put food on the table for your children.
But not every activist receives community support. Black folks in Raleigh and Columbia were scared to associate with people like the Elmores and Holts, who were seen as challenging the status quo of white supremacy. Both families lost friends and status in their communities.
This is one of the things that has made me kind of bitter, is that the story has been told in somehow, in some way, to make it appear that the Holts failed because they didn't follow the rules. If you didn't get in, it's your own damn fault. And I think the black community understood it to be that, hey, you let us down.
And there was this misconception among a number of the black families and local people in the community that Dad had gotten all this money and he didn't share it with anybody that was involved in the case in helping him through this whole process, and that they became very bitter and angry with him as a result of that. When we didn't have a penny at the time, and we were being evicted from our homes, and he lost all of his businesses, and he was never able to start or do anything as a result of that after that. Then there was a misconception that that other people wanted their name to be on the case, but my dad took all the credit and got all the praise and the glory, when in fact I don't think that you'd want that kind of praise and glory that we went through, which he didn't get. So there was a lot of misunderstanding in the community about the success of him winning that lawsuit.
Today in America, 90% of our people live on 2% of our land. Our cities are becoming inhumane. Our rural areas depressed.
In 1969, Floyd McKissick announced plans to build a city free from racism. His vision would be called Soul City. All people would be welcome. But it was a place designed especially for Black people and poor people to thrive. However, Soul City faced intense opposition from powerful people, including newly elected Senator Jesse Helms, who had this to say to McKissick. I do not favor the expenditure of taxpayers' funds on the project known as Soul City. Moreover, at the appropriate time, I intend to request a careful, independent examination of expenditures to date. Soul City would fail to attract the businesses and residents that it set out to. However, McKissick and his team succeeded in building important infrastructure, including modern water and sewage treatment facilities. McKissick would go back to practicing law, eventually being appointed the first African-American judge in North Carolina's 9th Judicial District. However, in this interview, towards the end of his life, McKissick was uncharacteristically candid about the effects and efforts of the civil rights movement. A lifelong activist who projected hope, if not optimism, McKissick took on a different tone to answer this question.
What did the 60s not accomplish that it should have accomplished, given the tactics and the aspirations of the movement? Or did it accomplish everything that it set out to accomplish?
No. The answer is no in one sense. The 60s represented an area to eradicate the barriers of segregation. What we thought were the barriers of segregation. We thought that integration would be the solution. We did not think in terms of institutional racism. We thought that the destruction of overt and obvious discrimination, discriminatory signs would change the minds and hearts of people. It didn't. We're dealing with the hardcore racism. Now, I always felt that way. And that was the reason I was not that popular.
Well, even within that clip, you hear his labored breathing. At a time, he's a man that knows he has a limited period of time to live. He has lung cancer, which is why I think he was being as truthful as possible, because I don't think that's something he probably would necessarily have said otherwise. I think he always tried to put a more positive spin, but he was tired. I think he thought, even though Soul City did not succeed, as some people would say, the demise of Soul City, although I'm living here right now, and it is still the only place in Warren County that will, is accessible and capable of having new industry because of its infrastructure. I think he expected just to, not so much to get applause, but to some level of respect in just the concept of what he had been doing. And I think the older he got, the less respect he got. He accomplished a number of great things for Black people and spoke on a variety of issues and accomplished a great number of things in his life. But I'm waiting for him to be revered in the way that I think he should be.
Like the McKissicks, the Holts and Elmores understand through experience the sacrifices that activists and their families make. As a result of their challenge to segregation, Joseph Sr. lost his job and Alwina lost a month's salary, a reprisal tactic known as economic strangulation. Both families suffered early deaths as well.
The stress that we had gone through during that period of time, and it really didn't go away. As a matter of fact, we continued to get phone calls to the time I was up in my junior year of college, okay? So it was It was stress. She wasn't expected to die, but she just got sick, and I don't want to talk about it.
As a result of his lawsuit, George Elmore's businesses were targeted for retribution and eventually closed. His properties were seized.
I don't really think anyone ever really fully understood the impact and the sacrifice. In fact, I don't even think my dad thought about the impact and the sacrifice that taking on this initiative would have had. Never gained anything again as a result of that. Never was able to get a good job, never had a retirement, wasn't eligible for Social Security or anything. The case was decided in 1947, and he passed away in 1959. So he had a pauper's life from 1947 to 1959.
After the case was decided, the KKK continued threatening the Elmore family. The stress of the violence, coupled with the economic strangulation, deeply affected George and Laura.
She ended up having a nervous breakdown, spent the rest of her life, as a matter of fact, in and out of hospitals. Then she was committed to a hospital because she had completely lost her mind, as they used to say back in the day. But she remembered me, and she remembered my older sister. We would all visit her often when she was in the hospital, in the mental institution that she spent the remaining of her life until she passed away. My sisters didn't get the nurturing and the care that my mother had given to my older sister and myself, because they were very young at the time, and in fact babies, and she wasn't there for them. So both of my sisters were severely impacted by not having a mother to nurture them like she nurtured us.
I say this about all civil rights activists. When we invite them to come talk about their experience, the experience is about how we move from tragedy to triumph. We don't treat them like veterans. Like, we use civil rights veterans, but we don't treat them like veterans. We don't think about what does it mean to sacrifice yourself and your experience and the psychic impact. It's expected that you're supposed to just trudge along. You're not supposed to talk about the bad things unless the bad things are in the context of, we started here, this is how bad it was, and then it finally ended up in this great, wonderful place of equality and freedom. And of course, as a beneficiary, I'm not suggesting that there's not a triumphant part of this, right? What I am suggesting is that there's a complexity about what it takes to do movement work and the harm that it causes people physically, mentally, psychically. It impacts their own children in ways that it's sometimes difficult even for the children to talk about, because the children are not given the space any more than the civil rights activists are given the space to say, this was a really painful moment. And for us to sit in that, just sit in that it was a painful moment.
A painful moment for Joseph occurred when he moved back to Raleigh after serving some years in the Air Force. He came home to a city that did not recognize his family's contribution to civil rights.
Whenever civil rights was mentioned or discussed, or school integration, nobody mentioned us. Interviews and newspaper stories were written and whatnot, and nobody interviewed the Holts. It was as though we never existed. And that was very disappointing, and that hurt a lot. The story was a completely different story, about a completely different family, and about a completely different set of events. My dad was here. He didn't pass away until he was 88 years old. He passed away in 1995. And he was never interviewed until Deborah, my daughter Deborah, interviewed him when she produced Exhausted Remedies, Joe Holt's story. It took his passing for our story to come out. The news people picked it up, and that's how the story got resurrected. It is just now beginning to be understood and to be credited in the way that it should have been a long time ago.
A mile marker placed by the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission now pays tribute to the Holt's efforts as civil rights pioneers. The school that rejected Joseph Jr., which was renamed Oberlin Middle School, made their new mascot the Trailblazers and named Joseph as the original Trailblazer.
I never imagined this, but to know that finally the community recognized their toil, their suffering, their effort, that would do a whole lot for them. And I can't put into words how honored I feel and how lifted up I feel by it, in spirit. I never anticipated anything like that. It's quite an honor. But I don't feel total justice. I think justice would be served if there would be some official statement, I don't know, from the Wake County Board or from some state agency that yes, this family led the civil rights movement, and by all rights, he should have gotten into school. Okay, but the reason he didn't was not their fault. I would like for somebody to say that other than me. And I would feel good about that. I really would.
I look at a picture of my mother and father after the case of them being sworn in to vote. I think that's the only justice they got, was the opportunity after the lawsuit for them to be the first to stand in line, raise their right hand and take an oath and vote. I think I was blessed not to be angry and bitter. I don't know what caused it or how it happened, but I think that I was very blessed. But I know of a few people around my age that should have been treated for PTSD.
They were domestic soldiers, and they were damaged by this society, by this government, by this state, by the citizens of this nation. I would like the VA administration to count civil rights activists as veterans and offer them the same benefits. That, I think, more than anything, should happen, that we should either collectively and or through the state or some other formula provide a space for them to get the physical, medical, psychiatric health services that they need.
Now that we are all here together again, how does it feel to share this space with other children of civil rights leaders?
Well, I'm just very honored, first of all, to be sharing space with these distinguished people, these very esteemed people. They are pioneers, they're civil rights pioneers, and they also exemplify courage, or they represent courage.
Thank you.
My siblings should be here instead of me. And I spoke to my sister Andre actually this recently when the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington occurred, and she was there. And she was distraught that day because she was remembering all the trauma she had been through. And Andre and Henry Vickers were the only African Americans to go from the 8th grade all the way through the 12th grade, the only ones in their class. So I think she and Henry will still not discuss it. I've tried to make them talk about it and have written pieces on this academically. And I think that just shows the level of trauma it put most of these people through. I think I was able to deal with it better because it was only 3rd grade and they weren't as evil.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I'm more than honored to be here with these 3 distinguished people as well. I didn't realize that there was so much similarity between families that coming from South Carolina and to North Carolina, and having moved up here, finding out that there are someones that have suffered the same consequences that my family went through. It's a real pleasure to meet them and to see the similarities in our stories, but the fact that we can carry them on and bring them out at this point in time is a real honor. I have a younger sister now that of the 4 of us, there are only 2 of us left, and she was so traumatized by what happened to the family, she's unable to even speak about it today. She has a lot of interest in it, but she can't talk about it because of the impact that it had on her. She was a young child, didn't get the mothering care that was required of someone at her age. And then my dad passed away, and then my older sister who passed away last year, and I brought them to New York to try to carry them on. So it's a pleasure to keep this story alive. It took some 60 years plus before my dad's story was recognized, even in Columbia. It was never taught in the schools there. And now there's 2 books in the elementary class rooms that speak about the plight of my dad. So I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you discuss these similarities, I think it's interesting to think about, as children, you were segregated from each other geographically and yet living the same life experience. Do you have any curiosity for each other? Are there questions you might have for each other about what it meant personally for you at that time to witness what was happening as you talk about these similarities of your stories?
Well, I was really struck by the incidents and the events that occurred with Cresswell's case. He was very young, and as I read that story, and it's not that I didn't know about those kinds of things, but to know that I was going to meet someone like that, and it was just kind of a very personal kind of experience to read what happened to him just because his dad registered to vote, and then he was denied, and then challenged the system. Now, we have those rights, and people today are still making a big issue out of this thing. You know, it was heartbreaking to read what happened to this family. I mean, he lost everything. He lost everything just for wanting to be a man and just be an American. Okay, and we hear people today trying to erase this kind of thing, act as though it's insignificant, but for me to read that and to realize that they had been through that, it was heartbreaking and infuriating. It's criminal that today we're having to deal with that same kind of thing.
What's more appalling to me is that here we are in 2023, and it feels to me as if we've gone back to 1954. And it's really appalling that my young children, my grands and great-grands, are having to suffer through the same consequences that I suffer through, making it very difficult for one to vote, which is our right, and we don't have that right. Or they're making it as difficult as humanly possible for that right again. And for 2 of us, or 3 of us to have shared the same similar evolutions, it's mind-boggling.
I think I wanted to say how lucky I am that my father's income came from black people. He was an attorney. You might notice that almost all the other civil rights leaders, they tended to be pastors, which also meant their income came from the black community. They had a unique ability to speak because their income was not strangulated by white folk, because he knew he could pay his mortgage and take care of his children because most of his money came from black folk. I even tell a little bit about how the whole neighborhood would help us if they heard the Klan was after us and put on all the lights on the street. I also just wanted to say that I am younger, and it's sad to me that I was a registrar when I turned 18 in Warren County. I've registered so many black folks, and to this day, Eva Clayton, former congresswoman, claims that I'm part of the reasons she was successful, because I would go anywhere with my information. Okay, all I need is, can you give me a phone bill? Can you give me something basic? Of course, we're technology today, but that was many years ago. And a lot of people in Warren County to this day, definitely majority black, but they still vote. And I'm fortunate, too, to live in Soul City now, where my father first started. And the community there still has somewhat of a mindset of the black vote matters. I saw 3 signs today on my way in here that said black votes matter. We have to get back there because we cannot allow in 2024 for people to continue to devalue the struggles our families and others like us have been through. And by not electing and not voting as black people, that's what may happen. And I'll say not just black people, young people. They have got to come with us. Black, brown, poor folk, all of us are in the same struggle. So whether I graduated, and I'll just say what year I graduated high school, was 1973. And I know these gentlemen are well before that. And it's sad to me that my granddaughter, only 4 years old, does not have the rights that I had. I'm pissed. I'm at a point now where, yeah, we fought for all of this more than once, more than twice. How many, I joked with a doctor the other day about, I haven't gone through that in scores. Scores. Not decades, scores. And we are now back to this situation. All of us have got to begin to wake up and realize, although some people will not value the history of black people and slavery in some states, we have got to understand that history does help us learn about not only where we've come from, but also inform us of where we're going to go. Because we don't know that, we'll end up back there.
But the fact that we don't know it will repeat itself.
Exactly.
And that's where we are today. It's repeating itself because many of us have been denied a lot of history. I'm today at 85 years young, still learning about a lot of history that I had no knowledge of, wasn't taught any. At the high school that I went to in Columbia, South Carolina, Booker T. Washington High School, all black school, and up the street from where I lived was a white high school that I couldn't attend.
I think one of the things that black people have always done, we haven't necessarily given ourselves credit for it, and others haven't either. But through all these years, these 400 years or so, we've been a creative people. We've had people we've been a people who exercise ingenuity. We need to find a way now. Our children aren't being taught, haven't been taught. You can't know what you've been taught. They don't appreciate, how important it is to vote. We need to find a way to educate them. They're not going to get the education in the classroom that they need to have to understand their history, to understand why.
Right.
Somehow, we've got to figure out how to pull them in and start teaching them and impress upon them the importance of voting, impress upon them their history. We've got to do that. It's going to contribute to their self-esteem, and your self-esteem, I don't care, it's intangible, but it has a whole lot to do with what you're going to do,
right,
if you know who you are.
Absolutely.
I'd like to ask you, one of the things that I'm certainly feeling is with regard to my own father, who was in the civil rights movement in Mississippi and with the NAACP, is this feeling of a rage of reliving. That you are reliving these instances of denial of the vote, denial to access to education, and in fact, violence is demonstrated with what just happened in Jacksonville, Florida. And in a lot of ways, there are points or parts of the civil rights movement that have become unspeakable, in part because of this violence. And I'm wondering if you all can talk about this unspeakable, right? Not just for yourselves, but for your family members who may also not be able to speak about that which is so painful, that's just difficult to get out.
What I see is a repeat of what happened that I remember as a child in the 40s. It's the threat of violence. We went through an era where we had threats of violence all the time. We were afraid to go out at night. Certain areas you couldn't go out or you couldn't go in. The neighborhood where I walked to Booker T. Washington had an area that I was not allowed to even walk through a shortcut to get to school. Couldn't walk in it because of the threat of violence. We were told if we walked there, we would never walk out. So it seems to me that the violence is the way of conveying the message that we're not going to let you guys continue on the path you're on because we're going to threaten you at all crossroads. And the threat of violence is what I think. But I think there's a change today in a lot of the younger people. They're not as afraid as we were. I will be perfectly honest. We were, as young people, we grew up, we were afraid to challenge anything or anyone. And so we kind of knew where we had to stay, the lanes we had to stay in at all times.
I'm mighty proud of the young people too. You know, they're not taking it sitting down. I can remember there was a period of time, maybe some 30, 40 years ago, that I thought the next generation just did not understand or would not understand because they had not come up under the duress that we had. Mm-hmm. You know, everything seemed to be okay to them, or that was my impression. You know, but I'm seeing them now speaking out. You know, you're seeing them leading Black Lives Matter. You're seeing them on network television and cable TV, some very articulate people, and they're using their intelligence, they're using their educations that they got at your Ivy League schools to articulate the positions that, you know, that indicate, listen, you know, we know this is wrong and we're not going to stand for it. So I'm proud of that. I've been getting to see that. And what Cresswell spoke of here, you know, when we were young, the threat. We lived in an atmosphere of threat and terror.
Absolutely.
You know, it was almost like a police state sometimes.
Yes.
You know, and you lived under that, and you had to be very careful. You know, but they don't have to be, and I'm glad they're standing up and challenging the system, and they're going to break that system.
I mean, we lived in an era of, not that we don't now, but more institutional racism. And I think between COVID and George Floyd, that's when this generation began to wake up and see the light. So we still got COVID issues. So we're still kind of just minorly post-COVID. And I believe that activism that started during the whole George Floyd era and does not end when we have things like Jacksonville, where one young white boy goes into a dollar store and kills 3 black people for no reason. You don't know them. And you almost went to HBCU at Edwards Waters College, only down the street. Thank God a security officer was on his way to get him. He jumped over the railing, kept moving in his car.
Or it would have been all those
Might have
kids.
been a whole lot more people of color gone at that HBCU. But the bottom line is hatred is still out there. And the fear is a different fear from our era. Because we knew that pretty much anybody might take us down.
Right.
Now that's true, but it don't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's just the color of your skin, period. It's a different feel. I've retired about a year ago from teaching right here at North Carolina Central University, and when I came back to do that 1 year face-to-face with my students, I could see there was a level of activism that it's still a little undercurrent right now. But I do believe they're going to rise up in 2024. I believe truly, if the HBCUs alone could get themselves together to deal with voter registration, every single student on each one of our campuses voted, we alone, and of course black women, that goes without saying, you know, will make the difference. So I'm hopeful.
Yes. So we've heard some pretty powerful stories about legacy and about the power of story itself, the power of story. And I think that when we look to Nishani and when we look to you, Charmaine, as researchers, there is no doubt that erasure will be minimized by the work that both of you do in the field of research. So I want to start with Nishani. Nishani, tell us a little bit about your research around the civil rights movement.
I think what is most sort of important for me in terms of driving and talking about the movement is the silences, the things that we don't talk about, the things that our kids don't learn or don't know. I also actually was a part of the curriculum committee for AP African American Studies. So, the very thing that is now being torn down because we're attempting to do what it is that you all are saying in terms of educating kids has become a site of aggression and racism and white supremacy. I think I'll stop right there because I want to make sure that I leave time for Ms. McKissick, but that about covers sort of how I got
and I'm going to ask
it.
you more questions about that.
Okay.
So, Charmaine, share with us your research.
When my sister Jocelyn was living, I was her legal guardian for 18 years. And Jocelyn is a brilliant lady. As I said previously, she's one of the first African Americans to go, with my mother suing, to go to Durham High, which was the first students to integrate here in Durham, North Carolina. And she had a double aneurysm in the brain. And so I became her legal guardian. She was very much the same person Jocelyn always was. I think Jaki knew her back in the day. Very vibrant person. She did spoken word before anybody knew what spoken word was. And so I'm trying, at one point I'd love to tell her story too, but the point I'm making here is that I started talking to Jocelyn prior to her death a little bit more about her personal experiences in integrating, and even took her back to the high school she integrated to talk to the current students. She unfortunately taped over most of that tape, so I don't have all of it, but she's still connected. And I'm now in the academic side. I have written several academic papers, either for Oral History Foundation, various academic, but all about desegregation pretty much here in Durham, North Carolina, and talking to those kids themselves and or their parents. And almost all of them come away with the concept they really don't want to talk about it. Ms. Brame, who had 2 or 3 of the daughters to be those initial people in 1959, said to me prior to her death, her children don't want to talk about it, and she's almost sorry she put them through it. She thought she was doing the right thing, but now on the other end, because it was so traumatic for students. And at the end of the day, I did the work on all those students, and many, many of them either still don't want to talk about it, find it traumatic, or want to take it to their grave.
Can I ask you a little bit more about that? I did an oral history with Carl Stokes' son, who was also one of the first kids to integrate. And this is in part what I was talking about when I said the unspeakable, that there are moments, right, that are so painful that you can literally not say the words, right? So the education I would like to do for some of these kids, there are a group of activists who cannot share in that process because of the painfulness of the process. Can you all talk about that? That ways in which you either know other people and or have yourself experience within your own family, people who cannot talk, literally cannot speak.
Well, in the community that I grew up in Columbia, there were a number of people that were, when they saw the repercussions that occurred to my dad with respect to the losses of his businesses, how he had a liquor store, and how the alcohol and tobacco people came into the store and broke up all the liquor and said it was illegal because it didn't have the proper stamps on it. Everything that occurred when the bank called the note on the home and said that, if you can't pay it in full by X days, you'll be evicted. And the number of things that occurred to our family, a lot of people were afraid to do anything or say anything. We, as a society, sort of became afraid again. They saw the economic pressure. They saw the reprisals of the burning of crosses and the threats that we encountered. So we did not step up and step out. And I think that has caused, or back then, in the 40s, was the main reason that we didn't share or didn't come together as a people.
Well, the experience with my family, of course, was much more recent than yours. You're in the 40s and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But the key word that I heard was reprisals. Right. That's a word that describes the fear that black families had at that time. I'm sitting here because my parents and I were the first family in Raleigh to challenge segregation. This was just 2 years after Brown versus Board. In 1956. And I've often said that my mom and dad were people who were very well liked. People gravitated toward them. But we became very socially isolated because it had been the experience of black people that if one person crossed the line or stepped out of line, according to white people, okay, then the others would be punished for it, okay? I mean, history is replete with those kinds of examples and instances. So we went through 3.5 years of hell. One of the things that I find difficult to talk about, and I'm not going to say much about it now because I can't talk about it. It's not maybe as bad as what some other people went through, but we're not here to talk about who had the worst experience. We're just talking, okay? But I can remember when I was a junior in high school, that one Saturday, creditors came to the house and they were going to take the furniture out. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that, okay? They came to the house and they were going to take the furniture out because we were not able to make the payments. My father had lost his job and he didn't have what you might call gainful employment, and he wasn't at home at that point in time that Saturday. When these people came by and to set us in the street, okay? And I remember looking at the 2 or 3 black men who came in with the white guy who was in charge, mm-hmm. and the look on their face was, God, you know, we wish we could do something, but we work for this man, and we've got to do what he tells us, okay? It just so happened my dad showed up, and at that time, and I heard him when he went in the back and got on the phone in the back to talk with the guy downtown, okay? And I listened, and I never heard my dad request or make a plea like that to anybody before. He wasn't an arrogant man, but he was a proud man. And he didn't know I was listening. And I got so mad about the whole thing, okay? But what really angered me was when my dad got off the phone there in the kitchen, he told the man in the living room that the fellow downtown wanted to speak with him. And so he was in the living room, he got on the phone, but I listened in. Mm-hmm. And I want to kill that guy right now. Mm-hmm. This was in 1957, 58, and they laughed about it on the phone. See, I picked up the phone in the kitchen, and he laughed. He said, "Did you hear that nigger? Did you hear how it sounded?" And they both laughed. I will never, never forget that. I'm not going to name the furniture store, but every time I walk by it, I want to throw a brick through the window. Okay? All right. But there were reprisals, and the people in the community knew it. One of the things that I'm aware of is that some of the kids who followed me and went into the white high schools later, I never got in, but they won't come back for a high school reunion. They won't come back because of the trauma that they went through when they were there. So they won't come back.
And you were going to say something.
Yes, well, his comments brought back a memory of mine. After the case had been rendered in my dad's behalf, and we were moved back to Columbia, and I'd finished high school in Columbia at Booker T. My dad said to me, he says, "I would like for you to enroll at the University of South Carolina." And I cried like a baby. I did. Because this was before Brown v. Board of Education. This was before Meredith went to college in Mississippi. And I said, Dad, we've been through enough. And I'm 17, 18 years of age. And I said, I think we've been through enough. I'm not the man that you are. I don't have the, so just to go to show you how what he did had the impact on me at 18 years of age. And I left South Carolina, and my aunt, I wanted to go to school here in North Carolina. I wanted to go to AT&T, but I couldn't afford it because we were strapped financially. Mm-hmm. But my aunt offered me an opportunity to come to New York to go to work, and that's the start of my work career. I went to the Aviation Academy, got an A&P license, became an aircraft mechanic. Eastern Airlines refused to hire me, but they hired 2 other people that were with me. We all went to the same school and got the same qualifications. Then I went to Pan Am, and I got hired by Pan Am. But the impact that my father's case had on me, I still say today, I don't know how my father had the courage to do what he did. And I can do nothing but admire him for what he did for us as a people in South Carolina.
Yeah, well, I wanted to mention that the commonality here is pride. Mm-hmm. But there's also the generation of those first, many of the students who I've met through the years, and particularly with the reprisal and retribution by white people to the parents of those students, classically everywhere. But the pride piece, and then on the other side of the pride is also the fact that I know people who did not tell their children.
Yes.
They did not tell their children and have not really told their children to this day all the story. I don't even feel at liberty to discuss some things about my own sibling. It's her story to tell, and I'm not sure I feel comfortable disclosing her. If she's not going to talk about it, who am I to disclose? But I would say I know a number of these children that I've talked to, and children of desegregation. They're not children now, of course, who have been through therapy, who have been through hell, some who have thought about suicide. Many have been successful in life, but they hold on to this trauma. It's like a post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Absolutely.
That just doesn't really go away. I think I'm fortunate, again, I was only in 3rd grade. They didn't do some of the things to me in 3rd grade that would have done. And I wasn't the first in the city of Durham. There was a few years after those older kids had come in. It was a little less. My things were like calling me the N-word. I went to music class. I love music. I went to LaGuardia High School of Music and Art. I love music. I still love music. So when they first did the first verse, I didn't recognize the song as being Dixie. But when we got to the second verse, no, I know this song and I'm not singing that. I can't take that home. And with the darkies, I knew exactly what that was, even in the 3rd grade. So mine is not at the same level of trauma, and the kids will put their straw in the mashed potatoes and slap me in the face. Not anywhere is the same level as because they just had learned that level of hatred yet. But the thing that I find the most interesting is, again, my sibling, all the people that were in the 50s and some 60s, they don't want to talk about it to this day. It's too traumatic for them, and they also don't want to tell their children.
Well, that's a really...
Because most of it is not pride. It's because they don't want their children to know the hurt and the pain they went through.
And this very conversation exemplifies, I think, to talk about that foundation of education. Because this is Black history. This articulation, the 4 of you, is about the civil rights movement. I know that you have taught in the educational system, so have you, and so have you, Dr. Frazier. And I think I'd like for all 3 of you to talk about how should the civil rights movement be taught now? How, what is the grace inside of these truths that it's kind of on our shoulders to ensure that this happens?
Well, I used to do something every day, no matter where I taught. Whether I was at University of Kentucky, large traditionally white institution where I got my PhD. Smaller campuses, Midway, Fayetteville State, A&T, North Carolina Central, Notre Dame, no matter where I was. In every class, at the beginning of every class, I do something called Black History Trivia. It's a book of days. I pick something that's on the date of and talk about it. It may come from the 1400s. It may come from today. And I tell my students, I got a little flack for it, to be honest with you, when I was at Notre Dame and when I was at the University of Kentucky. Well, why do I need to learn this? I said, you know what? You learn white folk history every day, and black folks are part of the United States of America, so we're going to learn a little black history every day. It will never be on any exam. This is just for our own edification. If you don't want to hear it, don't listen. But my point is, I tell African American history not just with the dates and times of places, but circumstances.
And also all of that translates into, if we don't tell people our worth, if we don't tell people how important we are, people will apply their own currency to us.
Absolutely.
So this conversation is also about how we teach worth. And I want to come back to you, Dr. Frazier, with the question of, you are preparing this next generation of historians, of educators, of activists, and how. Tell us some experiences about what that looks like, and how are these young people being enriched by these stories?
One of the things that students do not understand is that civil rights movement was all about strategy. And you had to think through who had the power, what were the levers of power, so you knew what to focus on. Most of the kids think you just get out in the street, you do a march, you call it a day, and then that's it. And they don't think that there were hours and hours of thought and thinking that went into the making of an event. And that they had to understand where the power was in order to apply the pressure. Ms. McKissick talks about money, but I talked about all kinds of other ways that you had to think about where's the power? Where's the power politically, economically, socially? And they need to have a more complex understanding about the people who were involved in the movement. Whether it's Rosa Parks, understanding that she's just not tired on a bus. I swear if I hear that story again, I'm just going to knock things down.
And everything was spontaneous. No one planned anything.
Nobody planned anything. And God knows we don't want to hear that she supported armed self-defense. That Rosa Parks? No, we don't want to hear certain kinds of things. And that complicates the narrative, right? And even the fact that people won't talk about certain things is about complicating that narrative. We want to say the civil rights movement ended up great. That's it. Now we all get over it. Because you people got your freedom after you all got killed and beaten and all these things, but get over that. So they need to understand that it's a lot more complex. And I would say the other thing that I talk about, and I'm actually going to sort of talk about it and spin off into a quick question, and that is Black people's anger and rage. And if you want to know why they don't want to teach AP, they don't want to discuss why Black people have a right to be angry. And that helps them in a lot of ways understand how a Rosa Parks can go from nonviolent to Black nationalists and believing in armed self-defense, or how civil rights movement can be very easily, intimately connected to Black power. But there's a lack of conversation when we talk about the civil rights movement of the things that genuinely angered Black people, that they're not able to talk about why they're angry. They have to just be triumphant that we overcame, right? Can you all talk to me? You've already spoken about one of those moments that is a continuing moment where you want to walk by and throw a brick, right? Every time. If you could just talk about that anger and, for example, the economic reprisals that you all face. You know, did that sort of engender anger, or were there other things that engendered anger for you?
I think one thing that just engenders anger with any Black person is that, I believe you used the word, I don't know who used it, devalue. You're devalued. okay? You're not permitted to possess dignity. You're disrespected. You diss me, okay? All right? But when you're disrespected and mistreated, that angers you. It infuriates you. And there can be all kinds of examples cited with any black person over a period of 400 years. So when you are disrespected, when you are not, when the contempt is expressed towards you, that kind of thing, that makes you angry.
I hate to keep referring back to my father's case, but I have to, because that's just where I can pull the information that angers me or that I feel is. But you can't find the things that you think you should find written. And we question yourself, well, why is there nothing? Only the findings of the case and his writing, his ruling on the case, but there is no oral argument nowhere to be found. So someone's asking me, what did your dad say when he was testifying? I don't know, because I can't find it. Well, does that upset you? You're darn right it upsets me. Now, why isn't that somewhere? Now, I know that the Palmetto-Lita, which was a black paper, there was a paper in Baltimore, there was a paper in South Carolina, the Lighthouse and Informant. Those papers had fires and lost a lot of information, but we did find some, but you can't find information. And that just angers you when you try to pull the history of your folks and what's being done. That's what angers.
It's tough.
Very difficult.
And as Charmaine mentioned, you kind of got, maybe Charmaine or maybe you mentioned it, Dr. Frazier, you kind of got to know where to look. I wanted to do some research to help my daughter Debbie do her documentary. Mm-hmm. She didn't grow up in Raleigh, she didn't grow up in North Carolina, she's a military kid, okay? So but she wanted to do a documentary on our family. And so I began to do some research to try to help her, but I kind of knew where to go and look, okay? But as you said, I knew it wasn't gonna be in the News and Observer, and it wasn't gonna be in the Raleigh Times. So I went to the Carolinian, and some of the folks at the Carolinian at that time, they didn't even know.
Right.
They said, well, we had a flood or we had a fire. I said, no, somewhere, I hope. I finally went to Richard B. Harrison Library, Al. I went down there and I found out that the lady had volumes back there, bound volumes of past Carolinian editions. Yep. And I went digging in there and I found out a lot of things, but I kind of knew what period of time to look at, and that helped. But yeah, unless you are in touch with some of that, it makes it very, very difficult.
So we talked a little bit about sort of some of the complications and difficulties that you all had. I'm being really nice when I say complications and difficulties, particularly around the economic strangulation, the ways in which people attempted to do harm.
I just finished talking, but I want to talk about that a second. My mother was a school teacher. At that time, she had been a school teacher about 25 years. And for about, I guess, almost all that time, except for maybe 5 years, she had been a principal. So she had that kind of seniority, okay? But anyway, because we had already begun to encounter economic difficulties and financial difficulties from about a year prior, when I started school in the 10th grade, started the 10th grade year, she said, Joseph, she said, I want you to meet me downtown. This was about a month after school started, because I wasn't able to get you the clothes I wanted to send you off to school with. You start the school year with new clothes and all that. Well, I didn't care too much about that, but she felt bad about that. So back in that day and time, when the Wake County school teachers got paid, many of them went and got their checks cashed at Hudson Belt. Yeah. Okay? All right, because that's one place that would honor their checks. Okay, honor a colored person's check.
Right.
Okay? And I was sitting there in the waiting area of the lobby. I didn't see her, and I'm wondering where Mom is. And but I didn't leave because my mom told me just to be there. Right. Okay. Now, I'm in high school, but I was gonna be there. I was gonna be there. Well, after a while, I said, well, I don't know, I guess, maybe she had to do some shopping somewhere else. And I decided I'd go ahead and catch the bus. So I walked up the street, up Fayetteville Street, to the bus stop to wait for the Oberlin Road bus. And I happened to look down the street and I saw my mom walking toward the bus stop. And I knew something was wrong because she just looked like she didn't know where she was. And so I walked toward her. And when I approached my mom and got close to her, it was almost as though she didn't even see me. I said, "Mom, are you all right?" And she said, Joseph, are you all right?" I said, "Yes, I'm all right. Mom, is something wrong?" She said, "Joseph, they took all my check."
Oh my God.
They took all my check. She says, "I don't know what I'm going to do, but I've got to go talk with somebody." It was almost 5 o'clock then. She said, do you have enough money to get home? I think I had 10 or 15 cents, enough to get home. So she said, "You catch the bus and go home." I found out later, Mom and Dad didn't talk with me directly, but her check had been, this is a woman who's worked for 25 years, has been a principal. Her check was garnished for every amount, for the entire amount, except I believe 88 cents.
Wow.
So you talk about economic strangulation. I remember that was a hurt that I live with to this day. Yeah. And that was terror. That was terror. Yeah. How do you respond to that? Yeah. You don't have anybody to go to, to get redress. But that happened. That happened with us.
Well, economic strangulation, I can speak to very well. And I was 6 years old and younger. I remember we were well off. At least I thought we were well off. But the year after the big impact of losing everything, my dad didn't come home either that Christmas Eve or something, and I don't remember it. I mean, the parents didn't share with the children any of those things, the difficulties they were going through. But I remember that morning when we went to the sofa to look for our gifts and there was nothing there. My mom was in tears, and Dad came home, I guess sometime later that day, and he was in shambles. I've heard that he was arrested or something had happened. I don't know the facts or the truth. I can't say one way or the other. But anyway, he came home and he was in tears, and we were all in tears as a result of that. So we went from a family that was well off, having a lot of things, and living a great life, plenty of food, plenty of everything, to nothing. And that impact is the impact that had a very detrimental hit on my mother's health too, because my mom was a stay-home mom. She never worked. She took us to school, made breakfast for everyone, and Dad went to work, and she was home, and she sewed, she made clothes for us and everything. So after that incident on that Christmas, that's when our lives became distraught and things just went downhill from there. In fact, we ended up losing the house, and my father's sister, who lived in Washington, D.C., had us come and live in D.C. because he couldn't get anything in Columbia. Nothing.
Thank you all for being so candid. And I'd like to start this question with you, Nishani, since I see you as a cultural preservationist, cultural activist, in addition to being a historian. How are you creating spaces for civil rights activists and their families to tell these stories?
I think that's really difficult in a lot of ways. There are events that folks in the Black community hold, but I think all of us in one way or another find ways to do it. I do it through writing, other people do it through documentary, folks do it through community events and engagement, and some of it is not public, and some of it doesn't need to be public. And in fact, I think it would be more important for us to do more of these non-public events, because there's ways that I can plug in as a child of civil rights activists. There are things that my father has acknowledged that are unspeakable, right? So I can talk about those things, but there's some things even I should not be present at. that there needs to be space for the community of activists to just simply gather together without, the historian eye or the documentary eye or even the young activist eye, right? To be able to process with someone who intimately knows you, right? They may not know you, but they know you, right? And that, I think, is something we need to do more of. That doesn't come with an outcome that impacts broadly the public, but I think it's incredibly necessary for the folks because of that trauma, because of the PTSD, and because of even the family connection and reunion, right? To be able to reconnect with someone who understands.
Well, I'll mention one group that I work with. I've spent a lot of my time, actually, in the last 15 plus years, working with the Pauli Murray Project, and then we became a 501c3. She grew up here in Durham. She was an African-American female who did what Rosa Parks did in the South up in D.C. about 10 years previously. That's an example of how we can use a public space to talk about a variety of topics. So I bet it's been, 10 plus years since the Pauli Murray Project, before we were, bored and everything, had a discussion at the public library in Durham and just invited the community. And to our astonishment, we had standing room only.
Wow.
And we had people from 90 plus to about 3 years of age. We had transcribers to broke people into small groups to have just really intimate conversations. And I'd say some of the most miraculous piece, first of all, just the diversity of persons. We also have a concept with Pauli Murray, which I think you've got to be ready to be having uncomfortable conversations. They're not going to always be warm, fuzzy. They're not going to always be, it's just so happy and everything happened and we learned so much during slavery. That's just not the reality of it. So, no, it's not the reality. So I was surprised at the community. Granted, that was a number of years ago. But I use that as an example of how I think public discussion, public discourse can maybe open a space a little bit more for these difficult conversations, but also part of, what you mentioned.
I love your answer about there are some of these questions, some of these conversations that are not public, that are not public. And I think your next question kind of talks about how some of these conversations may have been marred along the way.
Well, certainly, when we look at news media and newspapers, we certainly know that it's been disruptive. That's one of my really nice scholarly words that we're going to say, right? But when we compare these news media, these newspapers and the impact that they had on talking about the civil rights movement, so how did these newspapers operate with regard to your lives? And not just the sort of mainstream white newspapers, but the black newspapers as well.
My recollection there in Raleigh, I didn't realize it at the time because I was just a kid. The Raleigh Times was much more liberal than the News and Observer. I was anticipating that the News and Observer, I don't know, I just didn't know, that they would be more objective, but they were not. They were not. I guess the first news story that told of our application to a white high school, the news story from the Raleigh Times came out on November the 3rd, 1956. I remember that. And it was pretty honest. It even spoke of how the superintendent initially had reported to the media that there had been no applications from black parents, okay? And he reported that my mother has said, no, that's not correct, I mean, that she was there in the office with him, and then he retracted his story, okay? The News and Observer the next morning, Sunday morning, reported, the headline said something like, family looks a gift horse in the mouth, as though to say, you ought to be grateful that we even entertained an application from you. But that's an example of how the News and Observer reported on things.
Well, that was pretty much the same thing, I think, everywhere, because I don't remember the exact wording, but the language between what the black paper said versus what the white paper said was different.
Being a media person, what can I say? I've already talked a little bit about the disparity between the Durham Herald Sun and the Carolina Times. But then I have my own personal issues with the News and Observer. As in my personal opinion, they were part of the demise of Soul City, North Carolina. A year's worth of negative stories on the front page of the News and Observer, an audit by, the federal government, and came up with a clean bill of health. There's no nepotism, there's no conflict of interest, there's no embezzlement of funds. There's nothing wrong. But that was bad on page 15 at the bottom of the corner somewhere. Okay.
And the potential for violent harassment by publishing your family's address.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the address
Yes.
was, both papers did that. Everybody knew who we were.
Yeah.
Everybody knew what I looked like and my mom and dad. And I sometimes felt like when I walked out of the house, I wondered, but I wouldn't think about it too deeply because I wouldn't have been able to function.
Right.
But I said, I wonder if I'm in the sights.
Yep.
I'm in somebody's gun sights here.
Yes.
This is a difference. You thought about it. It never fazed me I really never thought about it. Even going through everything we went through, I never had a thought that I could be captured, shot, kidnapped, or whatever. It's amazing how we live. In your case and my father's case, your parents' case and my parents' case were almost identical.
Yeah, almost just 4 years apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my sisters are not that far apart either from your cases. And
all three, that's right.
Yeah, because she went in 59, so the cases started, I think, in 56 or 57.
Sure.
No, I was just going to say that we had issues too. Even as a kid growing up, wanted to burn a cross on our yard. We heard there were a lot of woods behind our house on Roxborough Street. By the way, everybody knew where we lived. It wasn't like a secret. The issues that we all dealt with are slightly different places, so forth. But the hostility is there, like I said. I do remember, though, when it got so bad with us in Durham one time. Again, we lived with woods in the back of the house on Roxborough, and we found something. We just heard it ticking. We did not know, thinking it's a bomb. It actually, there were a couple of times it was just fake. It was like, in a box, things and so forth. But we had a lot of those scary moments that you weren't sure of. And I'm not even sure what happened that time when they wanted to send us all away. I know it was a bomb threat, but I don't know, exactly what. So I certainly felt a level of, I won't say fear, but certainly the threat of that something may happen. And when they did send us all away, I think that was the moment when we really thought, oh my gosh, is it that bad? Because we've lived through all these other things. So they sent the two oldest people different directions, but they put my brother and I together.
I think the only thing that became real to my family, my mother, me, my sisters, was that when we received in the mail an envelope a picture of Willie Earl. Oh. Remember Willie Earl, the lynching of Willie Earl?
Yes.
And they had plastered him back together, and we all, as a family, looked at it, and that's when chills went through our bodies. That was the most telling and scariest moment in reality set in that this is real.
So I have one last question for all of you, and it's hinged on thinking about your personal experiences and your collective memories and your collective stories that you shared today. What is your North Star? I believe that what we keep keeps us, for better or worse. Mm-hmm. What we keep keeps us. And I know what my North Star is, but I am very, very interested in knowing what your North Stars are as you go forward.
Well, I'll kick it off with the North Star. My North Star is to continue to encourage and push the progress of the initiative that my father started. no one understands, well, everyone here understands the importance of voting, as you were saying, getting these young people out to vote. That's my North Star. I have a couple of them, though. I was in New Orleans a couple of weeks ago to an OBAP convention. It's Organization for Professional Black pilots. No, but it's something else. But anyway, primarily this was black pilots.
Okay.
And my son happens to be a captain for a major carrier, and he's hires one of the interviewers and hires for that carrier. But I met at that convention, I met 3 14-year-old young people, black young people, 1 female and 2 males, that were all qualified at 14 years of age to be pilots.
Wow.
Wow.
I met a 22-year-old that was a captain for Delta Airlines, the youngest captain that Delta Airline has. My background with the aviation community, my father's role in the voting rights are my 2 North Stars. And I try to mentor as many young people as I possibly can and tell them that they can. But those are the 2 stars I try to follow.
I think my North Star is to inform and educate people about Black history and to elevate the consciousness of the youth and to elevate the consciousness of everybody, black, white, or whatever, about our role and our history here in America. Nicole Hannah-Jones is one of my heroes or heroines because she has stated it just as it is. We are at the center of the history of this country, and really, we are at the beginning, and that was America's beginning in 1619. But my North Star is to inform and to educate, and I spend a lot of time online sending out links or whatever to people everywhere, to try to elevate their consciousness and keep them informed and educate them. I want to kind of mention something else that's very important to me, and a good friend of mine who brought me over here, and I don't want to embarrass him, but I got to call his name because he's such a close friend, Albert Whitaker. Albert and I talk about some of these things sometime. And the things that we would like to see, one is reparations. It's due, it's right, reparations. Something that I would like to see is the elimination or the eradication of this thing called qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. All right? Policemen, law enforcement officers get away literally with murder, okay, because of qualified immunity. A third thing that I would like, I think a change needs to be made, is we need to get rid of the Electoral College, okay? We need to get rid of that thing.
One voice, one vote.
Yeah, one voice, one vote.
Yep.
And again, going back to education, okay, the entire education system needs to be revamped, okay? We need to tell the truth in the schools about our history as a nation. Why are you so afraid of the truth? Why? Okay, but that needs to change. And I am naive enough to think that when white people learn the truth, they're good white people, okay? And I'm naive enough to think that if you know the truth about some of these things, maybe you wouldn't be in the frame of mind that you are.
If it makes you feel better, we've already received information from AP from our pilot courses.
Yeah.
It's having an impact, and the real fear is that it's clearly having an impact on the white students.
Yeah.
Well, I have a physical one. In my house is a portrait of my dad. It's at the end of the hallway. I pass by his bedroom where he slept, and my mother, and I go to what was my room, which is what we call the blue room, and that's where I do my writing. And I pass by his photo, I don't know, several times a day. I talk to him frequently. So I have a North Star on one side that's looking backwards, kinda, and a North Star here that's looking forward, which is my granddaughter, who's 4 years old. And she saw my necklace last week. She's only 4, but she could spell her name. And she wanted to know about her. And I said, well, she's a black queen. And she doesn't always articulate perfectly at 4. A black queen? A black queen? I said, yes, a black queen from Africa. A black queen from Africa. And so I pulled it up on my phone. And so I thought that was good enough. No, she needed more. Okay, it's Nefertiti. And then we looked through and okay, her husband's Pharaoh. Okay, we went through more. And she continued to ask me throughout the 2 days she stayed with me, I want to see her. And I love the level of curiosity, but it also keeps me on my toes. And it also reminds me I cannot stop in writing my father's biography. So those are my North Star, the front one and the back one, and I think they keep me balanced. And of course, when I get totally off kilter, then I just ask my husband, like, if I lost my mind today.
Well, your granddaughter got it on us. I'll close with that.
That's funny, but true. I'll take it.
It's so funny when you said that. The first thing that popped in my head, and excuse me if it sounds terrible, but the first thing was, I know the one thing I did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. I know, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. So that's literally, as soon as you said that, that song just hit play, automatic play. And so my North Star is really simple. And I have that in the line of my handle. I'm the child of Black history, and I remember. That's my North Star. I remember. I must remember.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.